Mr. Terry McCarthy, President of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council, distinguished members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Thomas Coates and Mr. Terry McCarthy, for your kind words of introduction and for inviting me to share with this distinguished audience the story of Rwanda's journey in the last 20 years. On April the 7th, my country will commemorate the 20th anniversary of the genocide that almost destroyed the nation of Rwanda. Indeed, 20 years ago, we sank to the very bottom. Most observers considered Rwanda a failed state and predicted it would remain so for a long time. But for the people of Rwanda, that was not an option. And there was only one trajectory ahead. We had to move upward and do it together. The history of Rwanda in the last 2 decades has been about that of averting the total collapse of the state, rebuilding our social fabric, creating functioning institutions, and building a sustainable economy and inclusive growth. It has been about restoring life, hope, and the dignity of our people. Of course, rebuilding a shattered country is always a work in progress. We are not yet where we want to be. But with our limited resources and working in a difficult environment, we continue to work hard towards that objective. The progress achieved amidst considerable challenges suggests that these are ambitious but achievable goals. For example, Rwanda's economy has been growing at between 7% and 8% for the last 10 years. Our country is among the top 25 fastest growing economies in the world. According to the Global Competitive Index report 2013-2014, Rwanda is the third most competitive country in Africa. The 2013 baseline profitability index rates our country 5th best investment destination globally. In addition, Rwanda is the safest country to live in Africa. This is according to the latest Gallup report. Each country responds in a unique way to its own history and specific circumstances. Rwanda's post-conflict rebuilding started with a thorough self-examination and nationwide consultations. Yet, the statistics I just presented might also tell a universal story. Indeed, if a country as severely damaged and geographically disadvantaged as Rwanda can rise to its feet and reshape its future, then it is possible to build even better futures in similar difficult circumstances in other less constrained parts of the world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda's post-genocide journey has been a challenging one of rebuilding afresh. Our continued efforts aim to reverse a 3-decade cycle of self-destruction policies and institutionalized exclusion and chart a new course. First, we had to get the building blocks in place, create an environment of rule of law, peace, and security on which all others rest. Second, we had to devise innovative ways to balance peace and justice, focusing on the sustainable restoration of trust, unity, and reconciliation among our people. The task was particularly daunting in this respect. There were huge numbers of genocide suspects and survivors, all of whom craved justice. The conventional justice systems, even in the best of scenarios, and Rwanda was no such, could not meet the needs and realities we faced. So we looked into our culture and adapted an age-old dispute handling method called gacaca to contemporary priorities. In the 10 years gacaca was in operation, over 2 million cases were tried at a cost of less than $1 billion. In comparison, the UN-funded International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has taken 19 years to try 60 cases at a cost of $2 billion. Third, we had to establish institutions of governance that facilitate service delivery to all citizens. Most importantly, we adopted an inclusive ideology that gave everybody, men, women, and the youth, equal opportunity to participate in national affairs and build our nation's future. We also realized that we could obtain more positive results through decentralized authority and decision-making to lower administrative units. Then, in tandem with the decentralization, we instituted mechanisms of transparency, accountability, and self-evaluation through various initiatives such as performance contracts between public sector workers and respective levels of government. Throughout these efforts, We did benefit from partners and friends, but we consistently sought to focus on and adapt innovative, homegrown initiatives our people knew and could identify with. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, having established what was fundamental for a new Rwanda, we recognized that we could not go very far if we did not transform the basis of production. In this regard, the economic transformation of our country has been a major priority of our government. To get the change we needed, we articulated a vision that is people-centered, of a knowledge-based, private sector-led economy building on education, skilled and healthy human resource. And so we invested in education and now provide a 12-year free basic education, as well as technical and vocational training. Similarly, we increased access to healthcare, set up a universal health insurance scheme, and as a result, child and maternal health have substantially improved. Deaths due to such diseases as malaria, TB, and HIV/AIDS have been drastically reduced. In an increasingly connected world, we also recognize that information is a highly valued commodity for now and the future. To accelerate Rwanda's development and make the country more competitive globally, we had to invest significantly in information and communication technologies so as to make them widely available and affordable. Most African countries, Rwanda included, have come to understand that we can achieve faster and more sustainable development if we pool our resources and effort and increase collaboration, trade, and investment among ourselves. Rwanda is a strong advocate of regional economic integration, whose benefits in our region are increasingly evident through the East African community that brings together Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. We have been able to create a common market of more than 130 million people, establish a customs union, and undertake huge infrastructure projects that individually could have been difficult. From a global perspective, we recognize that it is mainly business and trade that will drive our economic growth and social economic transformation. We want to foster strong business links with the various parts of the world and develop real partnerships to spur our development. Recent events in our region remind us that several countries remain unstable and fragile, and that has a negative impact on the entire region and beyond. International terrorism is taking advantage of state weakness to spread on the continent. African leaders and people recognize that state fragility must be urgently addressed and are increasingly taking collective measures to ensure that conflicts end and stability is permanently established. Of equal concern to Africa is the threat of climate change to agriculture production as one of them. We are investing in various scientific and technological endeavors that will help raise production while coping with changing environmental circumstances. It is clear that this can only be sustained if there is more international cooperation to address the question of climate change. Africa is prepared to make its own contribution. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that Rwanda's post-genocide reconstruction and development is an ongoing journey. The progress we have achieved is testimony that we can reach further goals. We have moved beyond mere survival and began to grow steadily. So we are more determined than ever to pursue our efforts towards prosperous and dignified future for all Rwandans. We shall continue to draw from our history, culture, and experience, as well as support from friends and partners. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the challenge ahead for Rwanda and Africa. Thank you for your kind attention. I now welcome your questions, comments, and observations.
Thank you. We have 2 microphones in the hall. If you put up your hands, and we'll try and get to as many of you as we can.
Mr. President, thank you again for coming and for such a very interesting presentation. I had one question. You had mentioned safety and security was such an important part to the successful future economic growth of your country, and you also had mentioned international terrorism. And so my question is in addressing this issue, what have you determined in regards to the presence of terrorist group within your country, and have you found that other external groups have relocated from other parts of Africa to your country? Thank you.
If you look at, say, what is happening in the Horn of Africa, look at North Africa, then West and Central, then Southern Africa. As far as Africa is concerned, each part of the continent may have different kind of problem but together, when you look at the whole continent, you find these problems are interconnected, and in the end, across the board, this builds up to a similarity in terms of challenges Africa may face for security and stability reasons. So Rwanda in particular, in the part of East African community, for example, you saw what happened in Kenya the other day on the hands of terrorists. There had been other incidents in history in other parts of the same sub-region of East Africa. Much as nothing specific has happened in Rwanda in this regard relating to terrorist activities, you don't want to assume that nothing will ever happen. So you want to work with, and that's why I talked about regional integration, which also strengthens cooperation between and among countries. So even for regional security matters, the regions work together to address some of these challenges, whether they are taking place in one part of that region and not in the other. So for Rwanda, particularly, we have faced different kinds of challenges. We have, for example, had groups that were responsible for the genocide that have been living in the region. In fact, that's what has fueled some of the aspects of instability that have been there between Rwanda and the DRC, which have also touched some of the other neighboring countries. Now you can see instability develop, say, in the Central African Republic, which is, in a sense, is of a different nature. It has almost brought down and crushed the whole state, but it involves some of these activities that have also been happening in the region, including that affects us. So the only way, as I said earlier in the speech, first it is cooperation, regional, international cooperation. And then specific countries to also do their best in dealing with nation-specific challenges, which you find in different parts of the continent. But even having said all this, you can still see progress being made across the continent. So there are challenges, there are these ways of dealing with them, and there is progress that has been achieved.
Question over here.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your speech tonight in visiting LA. The question I have is, for you personally, what is your three biggest challenges for getting things done in Rwanda?
One is for example, where we started from more than 20 years ago. GDP per capita of 200 US dollars. Poverty levels very high. Disease, hunger, and later on all that compounded by conflicts and instability, then a genocide, and so on and so forth. Now, having done some good work and registered progress in building a foundation on which we can continue to build for the development of our country in terms of institutions, peace and security. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to worry about whether people have food, they can have their children go to school, they can access healthcare, and so on and so forth. And you also want to think about this in terms of saying, can these people be able to provide this for themselves? You cannot have a situation where it's the government that is providing, that is mouth-feeding every individual, instead of these people being able to actually be productive themselves. So the worry is about sustained and inclusive growth that feeds directly into development and therefore deals with the challenge of poverty that has been there for so many years as we know it. So poverty is number one. Peace and security, the other. And then the others are the usual, issues of prosperity, of freedoms, of governance. But while I'm saying this, I don't even mean to say you achieve one and then you wait and then achieve another. Then all these things happen at the same time. You may move faster on one, faster than the other, but you have to have all going in the same direction and enabling growth and development to take place.
Good evening, Your Excellency, and thank you again for entertaining our students tonight. You have spoken of Rwanda's past, one of tragedy, and today you project an image of growth in education and democracy, in the economy, in environmental policies, and so many other areas. If we were standing here 20 years from now, in yet another anniversary, who will Rwanda be, and which nations in Africa will be there with you?
Let me just repeat that question because I think the microphone wasn't working too well. The question is, if the president were standing here in 20 years' time, what do you hope Rwanda would look like then, and what would be your African partners at that time?
"20 years now, I want to anyway, in the 20 years, I want to look back and say Rwanda has continued to grow, has continued to be stable, and has been prosperous, and Rwandans are happy people because of how they have invested themselves in their own development and what they have done together. So prosperity is key for me to make sure that, because, and my thinking comes from, you look around the world, in some places, prosperity has been taken for granted. And my question is, why is it not possible for others? So I'm saying it is possible for Rwanda to also prosper, or the continent to do that. In fact, when I'm talking about Rwanda, it's because that's my country, that's why I have responsibilities, that's why I have to account, and so on and so forth. But I don't just think about Rwanda out of the context of the African continent, because Rwanda is not an island and cannot be an island in the African continent. The well-being of the whole continent and the well-being of Rwanda are just closely intertwined. So I wish for the rest of Africa what I wish for my country. And instead of saying, well, we've advanced, we've reached so far, and look back and say, but the other countries are lagging behind, I wouldn't get any pleasure in that. I would just know that one day, if your neighbor is not feeling good, that comes to you at some point. So cooperation, working together, and because after all, if the whole continent thrives, then everybody else, I mean, we do business together, the markets grow, it's good for everyone.
I think we have time for one more question.
I also am relaying greetings from Stephen Kinzer, who is a boyfriend friend of my father.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Okay, I'll try louder. Anyway, thank you very much. Is this better? For your inspiring speech, as well as the change in history that you have wrought in Rwanda. And I'm also relaying greetings from Stephen Kinzer, who is a friend of my father since boyhood. The question I have for you is, to achieve this prosperous and peaceful future, what sorts of information would be most important, particularly in rural regions, to get there? Thank you.
What sort of information would be important for Rwandans to get? I'm sorry, it's hard to hear. There's a reverberation going on.
Okay, sure. Is this a better sound? So basically, my background and interest is information communication technology.
Just the question, sorry, because...
So the question is, if there were certain information, so topics that would make the most difference in making change towards the future that you wish to seek in rural Rwanda, what kind of information would be most important to be freely available?
Information is very broad, and you can just pick and choose what you want it for. For example, in our case, the lessons we've learned in the last, say, 20 years, there are things we have done based on our own situation and, as I said earlier, homegrown initiatives or even solutions. But we have also learned from others. We have interacted with other countries and seen and studied what has worked for them in certain areas. And some of it we have applied in our own situations, and they have worked, whether it is about management of disease or productivity in agriculture or management of different aspects of the economy. You want to learn from others, so you want information. You need information. People will have to go out there and say, there was a problem of this kind. People here resolved it by doing this, and the results were like this. In other places, they might have done the same or done different things. And so this kind of information is what you need across the board to be able to progress on some of the things that are being done. So, but it is a broad issue. It's not just one single thing here and one single thing there. It's quite broad. It's a big thing.